A really startling accusation has rocked the Philippines, and what's wild is that it's coming from inside the presidential family itself. Today, we're going to break down the claims that have kicked off a political firestorm. It's a story about alleged addiction, corruption, and a crisis of trust right at the very top.
So, at the very heart of this whole thing is this one single, explosive claim: Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. is a cocaine addict. Now, what makes this so incredibly charged is who supposedly said it. According to the source material we're looking at, this statement was made publicly by the president's own sister, Senator Imee Marcos. I mean, that right there sets the stage for a political showdown like no other.
Okay, before we dive any deeper, I just want to be super clear about our approach here. What we're doing is breaking down the specific claims and the arguments being presented in our source material, which comes from the Peanut Gallery Media Network. Our goal is to simply understand the story they've put together and the evidence they're using to back it up.
So, first up, let's really get into the accusation itself. The source doesn't just frame this as some political jab. They present it as a deeply personal story that's rooted inside the president's own family. The source paints this picture of a lifelong struggle. They allege that the president's cocaine use started way back when he was just 12 years old. They then trace this timeline through a period of unemployment right before he took office, at 64, all the way to today, where they describe him as being severely addicted. This idea of a long-term problem is totally central to their whole argument. And you know, the accusation doesn't just stop with the president. The source actually broadens the scope to include his immediate family, the First Lady and their children, even naming Congressman Sandro Marcos. This really transforms the narrative from one person's issue into what's being portrayed as a full-blown crisis within the Philippines' first family.
To really drive home the personal pain here, the source quotes Senator Marcos, who allegedly said this about the president's wife: "The lady that you see talking on TV is not my sister." And then, speaking of her own brother, she reportedly asked this really poignant question: "Is that still you?" This framing makes it feel less like a political attack and more like a cry of concern from a sister who, allegedly, doesn't even recognize her own family anymore.
Okay, so with an allegation this serious just sitting out there, the source then proposes a way to settle it once and for all: a public challenge, specifically a hair follicle test. The demand from the source is very, very specific. It has to be a hair follicle drug test. So why that particular test? Why not something more common, like a urine test? Well, the answer, they say, is all in the science of detection. According to the source, the difference is absolutely crucial. See, a urine test can only pick up drug use from the last few days, but a hair follicle test, that gives you a much, much longer history. We're talking up to 6 months. In their view, that makes it the only test that can't be easily cheated and the only one that would actually be credible to the public. Now, according to the speaker, this challenge isn't new. It's been on the table for 3 years. And for 3 years, they claim the president has refused. The source quotes his alleged response as this simple dismissal: "Why should I do that?" And of course, that refusal is then presented as a key piece of circumstantial evidence that just keeps fueling public suspicion.
And this is where the source really pivots. They zoom out from the personal and the family drama, and they start connecting the dots to the national stage. The argument is that this isn't just a private matter. It's something with really dire consequences for the whole country's economy and its governance. So the source basically argues that the alleged addiction has led to poor decision-making, which in turn has had disastrous results for the Philippine economy. And to back this up, they point to a few key economic numbers. First up, foreign direct investment. The data they present shows a figure of $9.2 billion in 2022, and then a projected catastrophic drop to just $494 million by August 2025. This projected collapse is presented as, a direct result of failing international confidence in the country's leadership. And just to put a really sharp point on it, the source highlights this number: a 40.5% collapse in foreign direct investment for the current year. That is a stark figure. And it's used to argue that international money is basically fleeing the country because of instability and corruption.
At the same time that investment is supposedly falling, the source points to skyrocketing debt. They state that the country's foreign debt has just ballooned to 17.5 trillion pesos. This massive number is used to paint a picture of a nation that's sinking deeper and deeper into a financial crisis under the current administration.
The source also brings up a past legal conviction for failing to pay income taxes, and they define this as a crime involving moral turpitude. They present this as part of a larger pattern, arguing it shows a character that's unfit for public office.
And this is where the corruption allegations get incredibly specific. The source details claims of price manipulation on basic things like onions and sugar, and they directly implicate the First Lady's brother. They then cite a staggering 1.9 trillion pesos in alleged kickbacks from infrastructure projects. They even claim that a 30% kickback is just systematically built into the public works budget, naming key political figures as being central to all these schemes.
So, you take all of this, the personal allegations, the grim economic data, the corruption claims, and it all leads to what the source describes as a fundamental crisis of trust between the Filipino people and their own government.
The source lays out a pretty clear chain reaction here. The unresolved allegations, they say, are fueling deep public distrust. This distrust then shows up as widespread protest rallies, with all sorts of different groups getting involved. These protests, in turn, amplify the calls for the president to resign, which ultimately leads, in their view, to a state of national political instability. And this brings us to the central question that the source is posing. It kind of cuts through all the data and the politics to ask something really fundamental about leadership and legitimacy. How can you be the president of a country, of a people, who do not trust you anymore? The tangible results as described in this material are apparently already happening. The source points to ongoing rallies, intensifying calls for not just the president but also the vice president to resign, and loud demands for accountability. This has even sparked debates about what would happen next, with some people proposing a civilian transition council and others a military junta.
And that really brings us to the final, critical question that this whole affair raises. When that bond of trust between a leader and their people is fundamentally questioned, what is left to hold a nation together? It's a question that really underscores the gravity of the situation, and the answer, well, that remains to be seen.